The arena was vibrating with a strange, restless energy. It wasn't the excitement of anticipation. It was the hum of routine. For months, the hierarchy of the division had been set in stone. The champion sat on the throne, the challengers waited in line, and the audience knew exactly what to expect before the bell even rang. There is a danger in predictability. In the world of sports entertainment, silence is often more terrifying than noise, because silence implies that the story has stalled. The locker room had grown comfortable, too comfortable. You could see it in the way the competitors walked backstage, shoulders relaxed, eyes focused only on their social media feeds, the hunger replaced by a scheduled paycheck. They believed the threats were gone, believed the wars were over. But the atmosphere inside the arena began to shift, almost imperceptibly at first. It started with a flicker in the overhead LED boards. A single glitch. The production team scrambled, thinking it was a technical error, but those in the front row felt the temperature drop. It is a rare thing when 20,000 people simultaneously hold their breath. The air grew heavy, charged with static electricity that made the hair on your arm stand up. The champion in the ring stopped their promo mid-sentence, the microphone lowering slowly. They looked toward the entrance ramp, confusing arrogance with confusion. They didn't know it yet, but the era of comfort was about to be violently dismantled. The darkness that was creeping in wasn't a malfunction, it was a message. The narrative was being rewritten in real time, and nobody had a copy of the script. Then the sound hit. It wasn't music. It was a low, guttural bass that shook the floorboards, followed by the screech of a guitar that sounded like a warning siren. The darkness was split open by a blinding flash of pyrotechnics fire shooting vertically into the rafters, heating the faces of the fans in the cheap seats. And there she was. The silhouette standing amidst the smoke was unmistakable. She didn't pose. She didn't smile. She just marched. It was the return nobody in the locker room wanted to see. When she marched out of that lightning-filled entrance with fire shooting up behind her, even the toughest competitors looked shaken. She was backhand. The whole division was on notice. The camera cut to the ring, and for the first time in years, the champion looked small. This wasn't just an athlete returning from injury. This was a ghost coming back to haunt the house she built. The walk to the ring was deliberate, a slow predator's pace that ate up the distance and the oxygen in the room. You could see the realization washing over the faces of the commentary team, who stopped calling the action and just listened to the roar of the crowd. It was a deafening mix of shock and adoration. In the Stickman-style animation of this moment, you don't need complex facial expressions to convey the emotion. You see it in the posture. The champion retreating to the corner, the referee checking his earpiece, the returning star standing center stage, closing her eyes and inhaling the chaos. The lightning was still flashing on the screens, but the real storm was standing in the middle of the squared circle. The balance of power had shifted in seconds. The moment she stepped through the curtain and back into the sanctuary of the backstage area, the air changed. Usually, after a segment, there are high fives, producers shouting times, and medics rushing to check on talent. This time, there was a vacuum of sound. As she walked past the monitor position, seasoned executives, people who had seen everything from the Attitude Era to the modern day, stepped aside to let her pass. It wasn't out of politeness, it was out of instinctual preservation. The monitor showing the live feed was still burning with the image of the ring she just vacated, but the reality was walking down the hallway. Competitors who were preparing for their matches later in the night stopped taping their wrists. They stood frozen, watching her pass. You could see the calculations running through their minds. Their carefully laid plans for title shots and storylines had just been incinerated. The script they thought they were following had been thrown out the window. One young rookie who had been dominating the mid-card looked at a veteran for reassurance. The veteran simply shook their head, closing their eyes as if to say, "You have no idea what is coming." The fear wasn't physical hurt. These are professionals who take bumps for a living. The fear was irrelevance. Her presence sucked the gravity out of everyone else's orbit. The producer in charge of the women's division was frantically on the phone, likely with the board of directors, trying to explain how a secret this big had been kept. But the chaos backstage was beautiful in its own way. It was the chaos of consequence. The comfortable ecosystem of the locker room had been invaded by an apex predator, and everyone knew the food chain was about to be reorganized. In the deeper recesses of the locker room, where the cameras don't usually go, The psychological warfare had already begun. Before she had even thrown a single punch, alliances started to fracture. Wrestling stables and tag teams are often built on the idea of collective security, strength in numbers. But when a force of nature returns, the idea of us quickly dissolves into me. You could see the tag team champions sitting on a bench, usually inseparable, now looking at their phones separately, avoiding eye contact. They were wondering which one of them would be fed to the returning star first. It is a cruel business, and loyalty is often the first casualty of fear. The whispers traveled fast. Did she look faster? Why didn't she clear for full contact? Why didn't she say anything? The anxiety was fueled by the unknown. She hadn't spoken a word on the microphone yet. She hadn't done an interview. She had just appeared, burned the arena down with her presence, and left. This silence allowed the locker room's imagination to run wild. They created monsters in their heads. They remembered her past dominance, but memory often exaggerates reality. They remembered her as taller, stronger, meaner. The veterans gathered the younger talent in a corner, trying to explain the history, but words failed to capture the specific intensity she brought. It was like trying to explain a hurricane to someone who has only ever seen rain. The locker room, once a place of loud music and banter, had become a library of nervous energy. The psychological weight of her return was already doing more damage than her finishing move ever could. The hierarchy wasn't just threatened, it was already dissolving. While the backstage area was gripped by silence, the world outside was exploding. In the modern era, a return isn't real until it trends, and within 3 minutes of her music hitting, the internet had melted down. The clip of her entrance, the lightning, the fire, the walk was being shared across every platform, transcending the wrestling bubble and entering the mainstream consciousness. People who hadn't watched the product in 5 years were texting their friends. Did you see who just came back? The line between a scripted television show and a genuine cultural moment had blurred. This is the holy grail of storytelling, suspending disbelief so effectively that the emotion becomes tangible. The fans felt vindicated. For months, forums and comment sections had been filled with fantasy bookings and rumors, most of which were dismissed as impossible. To see the impossible materialize in high definition created a wave of euphoria. But beneath the hype, there was a deeper emotional current. They weren't just cheering for a wrestler, or cheering for a narrative of resilience. They knew the backstory, or at least the public version of it. They knew she had been written off. They knew the system had tried to move on without her. Her return was a symbol for anyone who had ever been told their time was up. The comments weren't just "she's cool," they were "she saved the show." The emotional connection between the performer and the audience is the lifeblood of the industry, and in that moment, the connection was a steel cable. The media outlets were scrambling to get a quote, a picture, anything, but the mystery remained intact, fueling the fire even further. The following week, the anticipation for her to speak was agonizing. When her music hit this time, the pop from the crowd wasn't just loud. It was sustained. It didn't peak and fade. It stayed at a constant roar. She stood in the center of the ring, a microphone in hand, waiting. She waited for a full 2 minutes. In television time, 2 minutes of silence is an eternity. It is a power move. It forces the producers to hold the commercial break. It forces the audience to lean in. She looked around the arena, making eye contact with the blurry faces in the upper decks. When she finally raised the microphone, the building went dead silent. She didn't shout. She didn't use catchphrases. She spoke in a low conversational tone that required everyone to listen closely. "They told you I was history," she began, her voice echoing slightly. "But history is written by the victors. I haven't lost a thing." It wasn't a standard wrestling promo. It was a manifesto. She didn't call out a specific opponent. She indicted the entire system. She spoke about the complacency of the locker room, the lack of passion she watched from home, and the hollow nature of the current championships. It was chilling because it felt true. She blurred the lines between the character and the person. She wasn't playing a villain or a hero. She was playing the truth, and the truth is often the most uncomfortable thing to face. The camera caught the reaction of the announcers. They weren't hyping it, they were absorbing it. By the time she dropped the microphone, she hadn't just sold a match. She had sold a philosophy. To understand the weight of the return, we have to understand the silence of the departure. The script of her exit had been messy. It wasn't a clean retirement. It was a forced exile, whether it was a devastating injury that surgeons said was career-ending, or a backstage political battle that she refused to lose. The result was the same: isolation. We see the stickman figure sitting alone in a dimly lit room, the glory of the arena feeling like a distant dream. The physical pain of rehabilitation is one thing, but the mental anguish of irrelevance is a slower, more painful poison. Her family had begged her to stay away. Why risk it? She had money, she had fame, she had a legacy that was already secure. Why go back to the circus? This is the conflict that drives the most compelling stories. It's not about the championship belt. It's about identity. Who is the warrior without the war? During her time away, she watched the show evolve. She saw new stars rise using moves she popularized. She saw her name mentioned less and less. The resentment built not out of jealousy, but out of a feeling of unfinished business. The narrative wasn't complete. The doctors saw X-rays and MRI scans, but they couldn't see the fire that was still burning in her gut. The decision to return wasn't made in a boardroom. It was made in those quiet, lonely hours of the morning when the rest of the world was asleep. It was a decision made against the odds, against logic, and against the wishes of those who loved her most. That is what made the return so heavy, the personal cost paid to get there. The woman who returned was not the same woman who left. This is a crucial detail in the storytelling. Often nostalgia acts try to recreate their greatest hits, playing a cover version of their former selves. But she had evolved. During the hiatus, she stripped her style down to the bone. She stopped caring about being flashy. She started caring about being effective. The training montage shows her in a gritty underground gym, no cameras, no fans, just sweat and steel. She wasn't training to entertain. She was training to dismantle. She studied the current roster like a hawk. She found the holes in their games that they didn't even know existed. While the current stars were worried about their follower counts, she was worrying about leverage and torque. This mental evolution made her dangerous. She walked through that curtain. The fire and lightning were just theater. The real weapon was her mind. She'd let go of the need for approval. In the past, she might have wrestled to hear the cheers. Now, she wrestled to silence the doubts. This shift in motivation is what terrified the locker room. You can predict an athlete who wants to win. It is much harder to predict an athlete who wants to prove a point. She moved with an economy of motion. Zero wasted energy. She was older, yes, but she was sharper. The rust that people expected was nowhere to be found. Underneath it was nothing but hardened iron. The locker room realized too late that they weren't dealing with a memory. They were dealing with a machine. Finally, the physical confrontation happened. It wasn't a pay-per-view main event yet. It was a seemingly standard match on live TV that turned into a massacre. The opponent was a rising star, someone who had been vocal on social media about the returning legend being past her prime. The bell rang. And the rising star charged with the arrogance of youth. The returning icon didn't even blink. She simply sidestepped, a minimalist movement that caused the rookie to crash into the turnbuckle. The audience gasped. It wasn't a flashy counter. It was humiliatingly simple. For the next 10 minutes, the match was a lecture in physics and psychology. Every time the opponent tried a high-flying move, she was grounded. Every time they tried to speed up the pace, she slowed it down. She dictated the rhythm of the breathing in the arena. It wasn't competitive. It was a systematic deconstruction of the modern style. She didn't use weapons. She used joint locks and stare-downs. She looked at the camera while applying pressure, breaking the fourth wall, communicating directly with the champion, watching from the ramp. When the finish came, it was abrupt. No long sequence of false finishes. Just one decisive maneuver, a pin and a 3 count that felt like a gavel striking a judge's bench. She stood up, barely sweating, while the medical team checked on her opponent. The message was clear. The game has changed because I decided to change it. The locker room watched on the monitors, silence returning to the hallway. They realized that their athleticism didn't matter if they couldn't match her intensity. And here lies the twist, the emotional anchor that gives the story its depth. After the cameras stopped rolling, after the fans went home, and the noise faded, she sat alone in the locker room. You might expect a scene of triumph, champagne popping, celebration. But instead, the animation shows her looking at her hands, trembling slightly. The twist wasn't that she was unstoppable. The twist was that she was terrified the entire time. The monster the locker room feared was actually a woman plagued by the same insecurities as everyone else. She had built this armor of lightning and fire, this persona of the destroyer, because it was the only way to hide her fragility. She didn't come back to conquer them. She came back to save herself. The fear she instilled in the locker room was a mirror. They feared her because she exposed their own lack of conviction, but she feared them because they represented the time she had lost. The story ends not with a title belt raised high, but with a quiet moment of humanity. She packs her bags slowly. Just another worker finishing a shift. The comeback that shook the locker room wasn't about wrestling moves. It was about the universal struggle to matter. As she walks out the back door into the night, the screen fades to black with a final thought. The world will always try to replace you. The only person who can stop that from happening is you. The lightning was never real, but the fire was real, and it is still burning.